and welcome. This is our first live webinar we've done here in a little while because we've had a busy couple of months. My name is Caitlin Ryan. I'm the Executive Director here at the Cannabis Alliance, and we'll do some additional introductions here. But today we're going to be doing a legislative redux on the 2024 short legislative session, which is the second half of the biennium here in Washington State. And Representative Wiley, when she came on, asked, oh, have you enjoyed like a little bit of the break? And I was like, actually, for us, we actually started working harder because we have passed some really exciting legislation, which I'm super looking forward to having that conversation here. But that has then meant that we've had a lot of work to do with agencies now to get some of this really cool legislation operational. We'll talk about that. We also had really big news at the federal level yesterday that we started talking about. So we thought we'd save it for here, which I think we'll start with. But to begin, I want to thank all of you very much for being here today. Representative Wiley and Representative Kloba, thank you so much as the chairs of the Regulated Substances and Gaming Committee, which all of our legislation goes through in the House, and Emma, Legislative Assistant to Senator Kaiser, who is the chair of
Labor and Commerce.
Labor and Commerce. Thank you. My brain broke, which is the committee that all of our legislation goes through on the Senate side of things. And so we all have seen a lot of each other during that short session, and we've got a lot to talk about. I'm not skipping you two. Al Ralston, also our contract lobbyist here for the Cannabis Alliance, and Laura Kaminsky, our government affairs liaison and founding executive director here at the Cannabis Alliance. And what's the word I want to use? The one who really got all of this legislation started to begin with. So really excited. We've got a lot to talk about today. I was pulling out my bill tracker to remind myself of all of the things that we did. And actually, we got a lot of pretty important legislation passed this last session that I'm excited to talk about. But first, as promised, we're going to resume our conversation. Yesterday, huge news at the federal level that the federal government is moving to reschedule cannabis to a Schedule III narcotic. It means a lot of things. There's going to be lots of discussion in the next couple of weeks and frankly months and potentially even years to follow about what exactly this does mean. One thing that we're saying to a lot of licensees is to remind folks that what happens next, all of this rulemaking that we are now very familiar with at the state level, that's now what starts to happen with this rescheduling only at the federal level and the size of the federal level, the speed of the federal level. So we've got a lot of time to sort of figure out what exactly this rescheduling means. Some really, really important pieces here is that officially, the federal government for the first time recognizes that there is medical benefit to cannabis. And, I think even 5 years ago, if you were to poll people and say, how close is this on the horizon? A lot of people might have said, I'll believe it when I see it. And we're here. We're here at this moment where we will get to see how this research looks. Is a little still in the wind, but all of the research, I mean, how many times have we been in committee representatives and we said, what we really need here is more research. What we really need here is more research. I think we could probably have it on a recorded tape even. We say it so often, and we're going to get to see a lot of that. Representative Wiley, you then made a comment though of who's going to be doing that research, right? Which is that big money, big pharma? Is it the research that we really want to see happening? A lot of research is dollars driven, and where are those dollars going to point that research in what direction? I'm not sure. We do have a license type here in Washington that is research based, and we do have one person who has that research license, and she's been looking into it. And actually, to do Schedule III research is not particularly complicated, and actually, especially in the wake of some of our wins here with medical cannabis in Washington State, a lot of research and development, frankly, that some of our medical cannabis producers and processors could very easily qualify for Schedule III research. It's a pretty low threshold. Other things that are on Schedule III are things like Tylenol. Like these are pretty innocuous items. So there's a chance that people won't get swept away. I'm curious what everybody else is hearing or what your concerns are around this rescheduling. So I can stop talking is really what I like.
Well, I can start since I won the race to turn my microphone off first.
Okay.
One of the things, and like you said, Caitlin, I, among other people, have been hammering on what we need is research. What we need is research. We need, as a committee and as a legislature, to be able to make informed decisions. And, we need it as much as you guys do, probably slightly different ways that we'll use it. But we're all informing our decisions. We just have different decisions to make. But at any rate, the first thing that pops into my mind is that I must have been in a real hole yesterday because I knew, like, I had seen the thing the day before that said, hey, they might. And then so I had missed that because I was focused on prepping for a town hall. But the first thing that comes to my mind this morning is we have the benefit of having not only really great cannabis research centers at University of Washington and Washington State University, and they've got piles of potential research studies, like proposals that they have wanted to do for a while and haven't had the funding. The second thing is in our RCW, our laws, it talks about how we apportion the cannabis revenues. And in the original initiative, it envisioned 1% of the cannabis revenues going toward research. We have sadly never hit that mark of 1%, but it seems to me like this would be a good time to see if we can bump that up and have some kind of graduated step-by-step increase to get up even into that neighborhood. I think would be very beneficial. So I'm very excited about the potential.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the part that excites me on this is the potential for, and this is maybe overly optimistic, partnerships in dealing with the bad actors. My feeling all along has been that we, because it's legal, because people wanted it, we're not doing a very good job on the enforcement side of the really bad, outside the system, bad actors. And we see that with the entrance of artificial substances and players that are avoiding our system to the detriment of the people that are following the rules. And I'm hopeful that if we are proactive, that our state can have partnership with the federal systems that would police that the same way they would police fake Tylenol. And so that's something I know very little about, but I'm concerned about it. And we seem to not be putting the resources in, just like we're not putting enough resources into the research. We also aren't, I don't think, are in a balanced point in how we treat our legal purveyors versus illegal purveyors. And the complication with what's been legalized at the federal level regarding hemp, and then the switch that some actors are doing to create cannabis products out of hemp that are bypassing the system. All of that is a concern to me in running a well-regulated, sensible system that is both it's safe and fair to the people that are involved in it. And so I may be overcomplicating it for this stage, but those are the thoughts that I've been having on this topic.
And when I think through what Rep. Wiley and I do to try and prepare our committee to take on some of these bigger issues that we face every single session, there seems like there's a slightly different emphasis or something some challenge we're dealing with. And so I think part of our interim work is going to be how do we prepare our committee members to take on the changes that could stem from this. And like you said, it's rulemaking. You said the speed. I don't know that speed is exactly the right word, perhaps pace.
Yes.
There's a word I like to use called glaciating. We as a verb. Al understands. It certainly feels that it's a glacial pace that government moves at. That is what it is, I guess. But I think that gives us some time to really think through, with rescheduling, what does our industry, our well-regulated, orderly, safe industry in Washington look like? And to Representative Wiley's point, how do we deal with that illicit versus legal market, and make sure that the people who've been following the rules all along continue to, have an advantage. So I'm excited by the prospect, and I probably will have trouble going to sleep because thoughts are going through our minds. But I think it gives us a great opportunity for all of your members to start weighing in. Rep Wiley and I, neither of us have run a cannabis business before, licensed, any type of licensed cannabis business. And so we're going to really rely on what you all are thinking about, and what are the questions you have that, you're going to try to answer for yourselves. And so really invite everybody to, bring us into that conversation.
I want to add something real quick, and this is the Senate component. So Emma, your ears can perk up just a little bit with this. From my perspective as a lobbyist, the relationship in the Senate has been good, and very much appreciate Senator Kaiser and her openness and willingness to look at topics and subjects, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. However, we're going to lose Senator Kaiser, and we don't know, unless, Emma, you have a secret inside source to tell us who's going to replace Senator Kaiser, but I don't think you do. And we're going to have a new majority leader. And with the elections coming up, I'm under the strong impression that the Democrats will probably still maintain control. But I also see cannabis as not necessarily a partisan issue, and that there have been some Republicans, Senator King amongst others, that are understanding and forthright and willing to take a look at the role that cannabis has in the medical side, the tax side, you name it. So my quest during the interim is to see how things evolve in the Senate as changes are going to be done, because we need to get whoever the new leader, the new chair is going to be be able to follow, in my opinion, the lead of the House sometimes on legislation as it evolves. There's certainly some education that needs to be done with members of Congress. We've got a good friend in Representative Blumenauer from Oregon who's going to be leaving. We've lost Representative Congressman Heck, who was the sponsor a few years back of the legalization of cannabis. And so there's lots of work ahead to get things positioned. The good news is things are, in my opinion, going very much the right direction. And I say that with discussions on the bipartisanship that to some degree exists and can grow as people understand and know more about what medical cannabis and its curative powers are in society. And it's just a matter of being able to bring a lot more people along, whether it's the new chair of the Senate committee or Senate leadership or whatever. Anyway, I wanted to throw that out because I want to throw a compliment toward Senator Kaiser, even though she's not on. Emma and I have worked together, so we know each other, and it's really important that this be a pretty thoughtful, thorough process, and that we get good, fair, honest research, whether it's nationally from another state or within this state, whether it be WSU or the UW, and that we try to eliminate as many biases in that research as possible. That's my soapbox for the moment.
Well, I think that your word education is going to be key. We're going to have more turnover everywhere than usual. And I was somewhat overwhelmed by the mountain of education that needs to be done with the folks that were there. Now we're going to have a whole bunch of new folks. And I felt that I shouldn't have been, but I was surprised at where resistance came from looking at this in a really holistic way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I would love to talk to that a little bit, because you, Representative Wiley, brought a unique historical perspective, understanding sort of where this industry has been and where it's going. And that historical knowledge is incredibly important. And, you know, to your point of, you know, educating kind of the new folks that will be coming on and serving in maybe leadership roles, making sure they understand the context for the choices that we're making and the legislation that we're proposing, and, you know, why we're doing it and where we've been. That piece is hugely important. So I'm grateful for the two of you for being there. And Emma, hopefully you will be in the trenches with us too. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of that education piece, I'm going to take a quick commercial break. On May 10th in downtown Seattle, and we'll get the link in here, we are having our Cannabis Policy Summit. And it is actually going to be more focused on this federal piece, but with an eye towards what we need to do here in Washington to be able to weather the changes that are coming next. So that event is going to be sponsored by Skagit Organics, who is also sponsoring this panel here today. Great supporters, and especially we're going to be talking about medical cannabis here next. Extraordinary medical product. So thanks, Skagit Organics. And then if you would like to register, it's pretty affordable. We'd love to see you on May 10th. The big conversations we're going to be talking about: rescheduling and descheduling, interstate commerce, the Farm Bill, as well as local regulatory innovation at states that have come online since we legalized, of which I think we now have 40 states selling cannabis in some format. And I think we're at 30 something for adult use even. And that's the one other thing I want to flag about this federal conversation really quickly too, is that the impact of the potential for interstate commerce. There has been a letter brewing for some time amongst the governors in California, Oregon, and here in Washington. That conversation is still ongoing. There was a little bit of a hitch, basically, because of some of the questions around the Dormant Commerce Clause and out-of-state ownership, which we'll talk about that as well. That was sort of complicating the conversation here in Washington about whether or not we were going to participate in that. Yesterday's decision might change that discussion a good amount. And honestly, letter or no letter, this might actually qualify. California passed their trigger bill, was a little bit more liberal than ours and Oregon's. This might be a triggering event in California for them to begin to sell their cannabis across state lines. We'll see. So there's a lot of big things changing all at once, and we're going to be talking all about that on May 10th. So looking forward to hopefully seeing you all there. Let's talk about Washington State specifically. I've already referenced a couple of big pieces of legislation that honestly we've been talking about for a really, really long time. I want to start first with the celebration of the passage of House Bill 1453. Representative Wiley, thank you so very much for your sponsorship of that bill. It's a long time in coming. I also want to acknowledge Representative Kloba. Thank you so much for your work on that bill as well. You really helped in a moment of needing it to carry it across the line, and so grateful for both of your work on
And
this.
the work that Senator Kaiser and Representative Kloba did really brought us to that point. It was more than ready to be done. You know, what was special was that we got it done in a short session that had a whole lot of competing ideas on the table. But the work that Rep. Kloba and Senator Kaiser did was absolutely essential.
Yeah. And actually, this was the story of a coalition of support that got a big bill across the line. I don't know who wants to tell the story. It was a roller coaster ride of a bill for sure. We struggled in rules in the House. We got at the beginning, I'll never forget, actually, we were at a policy conference together, Representative Wiley, with also Senator Kaiser, and the two of you were on the dais, and somebody asked a question about, and this is before session had started, and you both looked at each other and said, we want to get that excise tax bill passed. And you said, yes. And you said, oh, that's my bill. And Senator Kaiser said, oh yeah, that was my bill too. And I thought, oh my gosh, okay, this is actually going to happen. And LCB was on board and Department of Health was on board. Oh my gosh, this is actually going to happen. And then we got to rules and we had some other folks who were in support, and then it kind of started to stall, and we got some word that no, it was not going to come up for a vote. And so we got on the phone and started making phone calls, and the governor's office got involved, and we got some good recommendations from around. And like I said, that coalition of support got it through that threshold. And then we were in oh, I think I blanked it out. It was so traumatic. We had we had a really difficult, unfortunate fiscal note situation when it then was over in the Senate. And again, LCB stepped in and did a lot of explaining and a lot of hard work. And Representative Kloba, you got involved as well. Al, how many hours were you working on that one?
Well, from now on, I'm going to charge the Cannabis Alliance by the hour rather than the monthly retainer. Yeah, the glitch was
We'll
over in the
negotiate that
Senate.
later. Yeah.
Was in the Senate Ways and Means Committee when a staff person, appropriately so, brought up a portion of a fiscal note that was theoretical, and it really created a great pause with the committee, the Senate Ways and Means Committee, and particularly the chair. And it's just the nature of how a bill becomes a law and how sometimes it needs a lot of care and comfort to be able to explain things. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there.
And a lot of care and concern was taken. We added with that the JLARC study. I believe that's when that went on, which actually I am really looking forward to that piece of this bill. You know, in the end, I think there was always concern because that adds to the fiscal note, right? It's not, it costs a good amount of money to do a comprehensive study like that. However, as we've been working on the regulatory side of this now that is following the passage of the bill, you know, it's something that we've been talking about for a long time. And I know both of you representatives already know this, but the medical cannabis program has been in dire straits for quite some time. And I'm grateful that we're going to have this study also being able to give some really good information to the legislature in light of this, to see who actually is being able to apprise themselves of this tax benefit, what kinds of products are out there, you know, what this impact is. And I think having that light shown on this particular program is going to be really, really impactful. And then I don't want to leave the story hanging, but to finish out the story, then getting into rules into the Senate. And Al, you had a lot to do with this. We then had a coalition of Republican support. As you've already mentioned, cannabis is really a bipartisan issue. But had some really compelling thoughts from some Republican senators as well that I think went a long way to bringing it across the finish line. It's a long way around too. Good job, everybody. I'm kind of curious, what is everybody looking forward to now with the passage of this bill? What sort of things are exciting you most about this?
Well, I think it gives one portion of our industry a potential theoretical path to cross state borders. Long term, I think that's a long-term thought. But I also think about the little battle I had a few years ago trying to get over-the-counter medicines that are essential but are now over-the-counter, but they used to be prescription. You know, whether or not medical cannabis becomes a prescription medicine at first is one of the potentials, which means a lot of it, not just education of the public, but education of the medical profession, for sure. And if if that's the case, eventually it will likely become not a prescription, just like antihistamines were only by prescription once upon a time. Antacids, certain kinds of antacids like Nexium, very important to people to take them, and now they pay taxes on them. Sales taxes, where when they got the prescription, they didn't pay sales taxes. So, there's a lot of, I'm a tax nerd, and so I think about the implications of that. And if there's cheating and the fiscal note gets too big and it gets the attention of our appropriations people and our folks that are more worried about negative impacts than they are about positive impacts, that loss of revenue could get people's attention in a way that we're not happy about, or that doesn't do the industry as a whole any good. So there's a lot of things that have to be considered. I'm not sure our committee is going to be considering all of those on the front end, but I see them long term as things we need to be prepared for and knowledgeable about, and on top of what's happening in other states, and having a voice at the federal level. Now that there's a federal loosening, I think the need to really get involved with the likely to be long-term staff of our Congress people. Who's going to be around? Because we need people that are going to stay in the trenches past political turnover, both at the state and the federal level, to become knowledgeable and not reactive to mythology or something they heard on the internet that may or may not be true. I think we need to really have a solid educational approach with the public, but also with key decision makers, because there's things we can choose to worry about, or we can choose to be proactive and have if this happens, this is our stance kind of thinking.
Yeah, and
More strategic.
I think that I agree with that. And then I also look at it as this is a way that it can be beneficial for small business economic development, because it will kind of add some the supply and demand side. We're going to add some demand, and that way I think and perhaps Gadget Organics, among some of the other really high quality medical providers, can really step up in their production to fill needs that perhaps weren't being met before. I'm interested in what will descheduling do to medical? And, if it's, somewhere down the road, over-the-counter medication you can get at your drugstore, or is it something that will go to an actual prescription? In which case, does insurance pay for it just like they pay for other medications on the formulary? That could be really good. It could be potentially bad if that means that big pharma gets a hold of it. And we know that the variety of products that the small manufacturers and the cannabis world are doing, they're making a lot of really good, high quality products that have the entourage effect. And traditionally, pharma doesn't look at those things. They look at breaking things down to what is the one and only active ingredient. So I think there's going to be a lot to explore around those kinds of issues, but ultimately just that fairness of we don't charge for taxes on other medication that's prescribed or authorized by your doctor. We shouldn't be charging tax on this. And it's just so gratifying to know that all the hard work of everybody paid off there.
Yeah, I think just in more of the short term, what I'm interested in is seeing how the patient community actually reacts to this once they have the ability to go into a store and purchase medical grade products at that excise tax reduction. I'm curious, I'll be really curious to see, because we have such a dismal number of patients actually accessing the system right now. So somewhat going back to your point, Representative Wiley, around the fiscal impact, it's going to be interesting. And again, underscoring the gratitude actually for that JLARC study, looking at how we might actually be losing some taxes, but actually gaining the patients we didn't have before. And so
Exactly.
making sure that, we're balancing what is actually happening in the market with the numbers that we're seeing. And I'm really, really interested already. I know that there's a lot of producers that are paying a lot more attention to, what goes into manufacturing medical grade products, really considering developing products to send to retail stores. It's doing what we intended. It's shining a light on a gaping hole in the industry of certain products for a very needed section of our community. And honestly, the reason why we are here in the first place talking about this as an industry is because medical patients, medical cannabis patients demanded the access to their medicine.
Well, and their concern has been purity too. And so, I think there's a convergence at some point between the idea to make Washington cannabis high quality, extra pure, organic when possible, and the kind of purity that you have to consider if you're using a product medicinally. And I think that there's I think that there is the possibility of preserving the value and enhancing the value through that need for scrupulous processing and growing standards for medicine. And I know that a lot of our growers want that and do that in their own operation for recreational, and would like to get credit for it and would like to be compensated for that extra layer of quality and purity. And I think if there's competition nationally long term, I think that positions our state at a quality level and a purity level that I think could benefit both the medical area and the recreational area.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, making sure that Washington weed has a national reputation of high quality, innovative products that people want and need. The other thing that I have been trying to hash out is with the removal of the excise tax for patients who are authorized and in the registry, how does that work with removal or the descheduling? And is there I think if I'm going back far enough, the registry was kind of designed as a way that you could keep from having people who didn't really have a medical need accessing medical cannabis when it wasn't legal to just go to the store and buy it. And so that was sort of a safety. But then now in the post-legalization, you don't really need that level of safety so much. But then in the post-excise tax on medical, does that mean we need it more or less? And then how does that factor in with descheduling? Is there even a necessity? Because that thing's expensive. The maintenance of that registry, it's stupid expensive. So
Yeah.
it really, I think we do need to dig in and figure out with both, the patient community, the medical community, Department of Health, what really is the function moving forward? Do we still need it? Does it need to change, et cetera? Because I know it is, I hear from patients all the time, I know that you guys do too, that they will not join even with the excise tax because of federal firearm laws and being able to have a concealed pistol license. You can't do that if you're using marijuana and so on and so forth. I think there's a lot of issues to think about and unpack in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And my understanding is, just like other controlled substances that are prescribed, there is a system for that. And I can't quite remember what the acronym for that is. But because of the federal barrier, we had to create a separate standalone one. But does it need to be separate standalone at this point anymore? It's an excellent question. One I had not yet considered.
Isn't that nice? We give you
48
more
hours.
questions than answers. I don't know if that's what you had in mind.
Well, honestly, I think that's going to be the exercise of this rescheduling for a while. It's more questions than answers. But wouldn't it be great if we could save the state the dollars that are going on being spent on that database? It'd be great.
Well, I think a lot of the paranoia about having a database in the first place, going back to the historical reality, is less of an issue.
Mhm.
There,
Yes.
some of the folks that were paranoid about having a registry in the early days were really colorful characters. And now it makes a lot more sense, because we can have recognition that it's got medical value, which makes it different than cigarettes and alcohol for sure. And so we this is a special substance. It is not like the other regulated substances, and we're going to be grappling with that on an ongoing basis, really.
Absolutely. Well, and what has occurred to me too is also with this bill is a 5-year sunset. So we'll have the opportunity to have this conversation, and perhaps that 5 years ended up being more wise than initially we had felt about, because perhaps the landscape is going to be so different by then that we'll have to reimagine how we ensure that patients are not paying an excise tax on their medicine, and that may look very, very different by then.
Yeah.
So, I do want to talk about another bill that passed. We had a couple of other really great important ones for cannabis, and that's the low dose beverage bill, as well as the allowance for selling cannabis waste, which is really a really good one. We might be able to get back to those, but I want to make sure that I'm being respectful of everybody's time. I do want to talk about 2320, which was the bill that in its final form was one of the potency bills. In its final form, allowed for a request for proposals for research to be put out there to look at higher potency cannabis and prevention for youth access, as well as mandated a couple of, or I guess it wasn't a mandate, a suggestion that if retailers would like to go through a training process for their bud tenders about higher dose, higher concentrated cannabis, as well as I believe some signage was also in that bill. That was it's always a difficult conversation to have every time we have had it. We definitely have some water that we have not been able to bridge in the years between some members of the prevention community, as well as the industry and consumer base. And I don't know that this bill gave a lot of folks exactly what they were looking for either. Representative Wiley, I know you were a part of a lot of the negotiations with that bill. I'm curious, how do you feel about the bill that ended up passing? Do you feel like that was what you were hoping to get out of that conversation?
I feel like we needed to get it done, and that was the best version I could have had anything to do with. I mean, I felt like I did everything in my power to make sure that it was fair, and that some of the concerns about who and how was going to be involved in that were addressed. And I think it was really important. I think that we need to make it a first step to getting some cross education between some communities that are really locked into their position. And I think that that's where education of new legislators and legislators that haven't thought very much about this, except as a source of money or a problem that they wish that they wouldn't have voted for. You know, I think that education piece and sharing, you know, some kind of mechanism of sharing new information that's positive, because you know, there's the loudest voices are the ones that get believed. And there's some loud voices within the treatment community that are, you know, fairly dominant. And they're more dominant than I expected them to be. And that's partly why the process was a real challenge in a short session. So we've got work to do. I think a lot about that and how to do better in the long session at bringing people along. I think it might be good for Shelley and I to, you know, to possibly offer some kind of a brown bag updating process for our own caucus down the road. And we toyed, you know, we've chewed this over in a number of ways, finding the time and making sure it's really credible and that it's not industry dominated, I think is going to be really, you know, in order to have credibility, we have to be real careful where we get our information, how we present it, and how we present expertise and fairness into that process. But, you know, that's sort of my fantasy about what would be a good thing to do, how we find the time to do that and get people to pay attention are problems to be addressed, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was very pleased with both. I think there was some coming into the middle on that bill. Not everybody got what they wanted, but I think it moves us in the right direction with regard to you know, guidance and health interventions for healthcare providers. I'm hoping that part of that guidance is like in screening questionnaires, or when a young under 21, or yeah, I suppose under 21 person is seeing a healthcare provider, and you know, cannabis comes up and problematic cannabis use comes up, that they explore a little bit deeper about what is the source of your cannabis, and is it something that you're just getting secondhand through a licensed, you know, producer, processor, retailer? Is it something that you are purchasing on the internet? I think there is a real difference in those two sets of product. I know that cannabis licensees on the retailer side are, you know, one of the best in terms of LCB compliance checks. It's, you know, so there is some leakage, certainly, not all of it. And how much comes out of the actual illicit market within Washington state? I think that would be a helpful body of information for us to understand a little bit more about. Is it all high THC products? Is it some high THC products? We definitely see an indication in the research that there are genetic differences in how people process THC. And so to what extent is it going to be a problem? Like, do we know people for whom it's going to be problematic because they meet X, Y, and Z criteria? We're starting to see some of that research that indicates that. And so one of the things I didn't see the specific words, and I kind of wish we did, it's possible, you know, they're not excluded, but the notion of harm reduction, I think, is an important one. And we see it in terms of intravenous drug usage, and that it comes along with some big problems with hepatitis and HIV and other bloodborne transmitted diseases that you can get from sharing dirty needles. And so it's unpopular, but scientifically, like data-driven, shows a helpful response is doing safe consumption sites and needle exchanges. And those things make people very uncomfortable, but I think the truth is that they save lives. And so what does harm reduction look like in that, particularly that targeting toward that youth community who seems to have some more risk factors than others?
Yeah, I think you really underscored the challenge with this particular topic. It is so complicated. It is such a complicated issue that we need to come with complicated questions. And I think we haven't done the work to come to this problem with all of the complexity that you are pointing out. You know, when we're seeing it show up, what are the questions that we are asking? What is the information that we're getting so that we can actually start to target where the problem exists, instead of what tends to happen is people get very afraid and then a blanket solution gets proposed that doesn't actually address the underlying problem and creates other unintended consequences. And I think, you know, we're all in the space of, we want to make sure that people are protected, that there is harm reduction. If there is a problem, we know how to address it, that we're having honest, data-driven conversations. And in order to do that, sometimes it feels like it takes more time than we want, but we ultimately get where we want to go. And I think that that's, you know, the goal is, you know, let's take the time, let's ask the difficult questions, let's get to the bottom of some of these issues so that then we can put in policies that actually work.
I'm really looking forward to who the Department of Agriculture picks to do the research that's called for, and how that process is going to work. I think there was, by some folks, an assumption that it was going to be this group, and I think it was wise that you as legislators said, no, let's have this as an open competition to see, you know, who's going to make the application for it, so we can get different variables as to what the kind of research is and who's going to do it. So kudos to you guys. But I'm really curious to see who ends up with doing the research and what the research is and how much we all
that
can
was
be
the
part.
hardest part of getting it done.
Yeah,
Right there.
I know.
Yeah. And really grateful for your advocacy to ensure that that is a competitive process, and we get to see what that, a little bit more transparency in that research as it comes out. Because I gotta say, one of the things we've got, you know, about 15 more minutes, 10 more minutes. I would love to talk about some things for next year. One of the things that we've been talking about, piggybacking off of this, is there's a lot of really exciting, compelling research out there around cannabis as a off-ramp to opioid addiction. And there's some federal dollars that have been set aside, and looking at ways that we might get the legislature involved, or the budget involved in putting forward some dollars for that kind of research, speaking to harm reduction. Actually, you know, from our side of things, we see cannabis as a helper in that harm reduction fight. And there's more and more research to back that up as well. And so that's one area. A couple of pieces of legislation that we all have been talking about for a very long time. Hope springs eternal. I'm excited, Representative Klova, for round 2 of these. We're having, by the way, this here today. I know you're already working on your campaign, but filing isn't until the end of May. So we were hoping this was a nice little window before, you know, campaign season really starts to kick off, but enough time that everybody's had to relax. But homegrown. Folks, Washington State, still a Class C felony for growing a product that you can buy in a store, which most, I would bet, I don't know what I would bet, all the things that most Washingtonians actually have no idea. And the number of people in violation of this law, simply in pure ignorance, is significant. We are out of step with the rest of the country who have adult use states. It's kind of wild that we're still having this conversation. I'm excited to keep trying though to see if we can, like I said, hope springs eternal. I want to commend, I really appreciate your persistence with this and your willingness to keep conceiving of this differently so that we can have a more meaningful conversation within the legislature. I'm curious what any new thoughts at this point on that legislation.
Yeah.
Well, I think, go ahead, Shelley, but
Well, I mean, luckily I'm a little bit hard-headed at times. And so while I'm always interested in trying to figure out how do we get it done, the commitment to getting it done is always there. And I think last session's approach was to look at it through the same lens that we did with other with actual illegal drugs, and look at simple possession. Just like we re-examined it for all those other drugs, just putting it in that category as simple possession and stripping away all of the specific rules about where you can and where you can't, and you know, does it have to be labeled and all that minutia, and just stripped it away so that it's mimics what we did for illegal drugs. And it was a different approach. I think when we do that, and maybe other people have a different viewpoint on this, but suddenly the ideas of, you know, allowing landlords to you know, make rules that say no cannabis growing, allowing it to be, you know, nobody who is a licensed daycare can have any home grow, et cetera. Some of these other rules, which people thought were too restrictive, perhaps now look less restrictive and necessary. Like I need to do more connecting with the folks who continue to be in opposition to find out, like, is there some middle way here? Because I feel like we've been on kind of the one side, the very, very conservative side of you have to meet all these requirements and it's very specific, which I was pointed out to me that has some social equity repercussions, because it creates ways that Black and brown people will be over policed, just like they were in the you know, drug wars, and just like they continue to be, but at much lower levels than previous to legalization. There's still a disproportionality that remains and is tragically persistent. So moving to the other direction seemed like we would eliminate some of those social equity issues, and yet other issues popped up. So I'm happy to have the conversation with anyone who has any ideas, you know, new and different things, something to return to, whatever. But yeah, not giving up.
Thank you.
and I agree that it's a priority, and that we haven't landed on an approach that seems like it's going to have a clear path. I think switching approaches, like Shelley said, was really important, because we learned from that. But I'm in favor of not, if something isn't a problem, overcoming objections by overregulation, to me, isn't a very comfortable path. And so my preference would be, you know, I've never heard of anybody chomping down leaves of cannabis and getting sick.
Right.
Concentrates, chemically altered substances, yes. You know, there's, you know, and that's, you know, I'm in favor of trying to find a path where we keep it really simple. And that we use data and force of education to overcome objections and try to get to a real clear space where if it can't be used as a hammer against Black and brown people, and it allows the flexibility that everybody agrees on, then I think that we found the right place. And I'm not sure how we get there. And, you know, we've tried a lot of different ways of poking this. So I think it's time to you know, accumulate more specific data and examples from other states that have already done this and figure out how we can get in alignment there, and then you know, prove that there's no problem, no harm, and just and you know, avoid the risk of inequity. And then push forward, and a long session gives us more time to do that. But I like the way that Shelley has managed this, and, you know, tried to look at it from different directions to try to overcome objections. I would hope that we can, you know, work together with the industry and with anybody else who's interested to get to a place where we streamline it, we make it clean, we don't put a lot of Christmas tree ornaments on it, and we get the job done without being unfair to somebody. I think that for folks that are spending a lot of time and energy growing plants that are so rarefied in their genetic makeup that they're not easy to grow anymore, because they have an illness or a condition where they have to have that purity and they don't trust the industry. If we have a stronger and more reliable medical industry because of the tax system, then I'm thinking that might be a better path for some folks. Make it affordable, make it pure, and then we don't have that need, except for somebody who, you know, who's just growing, you know. I don't know. I think we have some work to do, but I think it's real doable.
Mm-hmm.
We've gone down so many we've tried so hard that I think we have to keep trying, we have to keep pushing.
Mm-hmm.
And it occurs to me as we're talking about this, so this is very helpful, that we have a group of people in this state who currently legally grow cannabis at home. They're authorized, they're in the database, they have, they've been doing it for a while. And so some of the fears that I think and they're legitimate fears that I was hearing from my colleagues are like, well, you know, what about security? Doesn't this put, you know, the neighbors, everybody else at risk? And I'm thinking, well, there's the only sort of security thing that we require of current patients who are authorized to grow it now is that it be out of sight and that it can't be smelled. And so I would like to understand from people who are currently operating that way, are there requirements within the framework that they are growing right now that are onerous and ridiculous? Are there things that, even if it wasn't required, they would do it anyway because that potential risk to their security is borne by them? And so, like, what are things that they're not required to do that they do? Or even if they weren't required to do it, like keeping it out of sight, do they do that just because it's common sense to do it so that you're not some big target in your neighborhood? I think having some conversations with people who are really doing that work on the ground right now would be tremendously helpful to me to help inform that conversation. So that's open invitation.
All right.
I've got one quick thought, and that is in trying to lobby members of the legislature and others on the subject. It seems to me that a lot of the attitude of people that are opposed or concerned about it is a leftover from the war on drugs, and particularly with the Sheriffs and Police Chiefs Association. So what I've done is tried to talk to my local city police chief, whom I know, and he's going, we don't even want to mess with that. We've got too many other major issues that we have to deal with rather than going out and trying to arrest people where the court system is clogged up, the jails are clogged up, and we're busy with homicides and major theft. Forget it. As far as we're concerned, it's, we've got other priorities. And So I've tried to talk with some of the representatives from the Association of Cities, and they're going, we've got bigger fish to fry. And so it's just a matter of kind of neutralizing some of, maybe the Eastern Washington cities that they think this is a big deal, or the Sheriffs and Police Chiefs Association, or the prosecutors, who they're telling me they've got other things to do, but yet the associations haven't quite gotten there yet. And I think it is a matter, as Representative Wiley and Kloba, you've said, to start looking at what are the real problems. Are they really problems?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. There is that disconnect between what the local law enforcement is, the way that they think about this versus the way that their sort of trade organization, if you will, thinks about it and how they testify. And so I think trying to bridge that is an important strategy. I appreciate you bringing that up, Al.
Yeah. And for our work, we're going to be spending the interim building, again, a coalition of support. I think the argument that ends the conversation every single time is, I will ask somebody, but do you believe it should be a Class C felony to grow a plant? And the answer is unanimously no. So I think we're going to be looking at this from a criminal justice perspective in terms of our coalition building and working with other organizations that care deeply about that and have a long history of work. And I believe we're working on a different testimony set for this next time around, so that folks will be hearing more broadly from a broader community other than patients and industry folks, but really truly, like I said, a broader community of folks saying, yeah, we're out of step. We're out of step. So thank you. I wanted to share with you a couple of the comments that we've had from folks coming through. A lot of gratitude being expressed around the passage of 1453. Somebody had asked about if they need an I-502 license to bottle CBD infused sodas. And the answer to that is complicated. There is current rulemaking happening. At the beginning of the biennium, Senate Bill 5367 passed. We are in the thick of regulations right now around that in terms of especially hemp consumables. I would say feel free to reach out to us and we could talk you through where we're at on that one in particular. But as long as it does not have any THC in it, there's kind of a pathway for it. But again, it's complicated, man. Then somebody wants to know, what if Trump wins? It's a question I ask myself probably the last before I fall asleep at night and first thing when I wake up in the morning. And I think
if that happens, I can be reached in Canada.
Right. It's complicated. I don't know. Although I will say that thought has crossed my mind since yesterday more than a couple of times, that this rescheduling actually probably goes a long way towards protecting our industry at the state level, should it get far enough down the road in the event that occurs. But we're all registering to vote, right? And everybody's voting and everybody's talking, especially to young people, about the implications here, right? We're all doing our part to ensure that that's not going to be the case. And then I do want to take a brief moment too to sort of flag. I did say we were going to talk about two things that we've been talking about for a little bit, and that is out-of-state ownership. I know already there are lots of conversations happening to see if the industry can come together on some common ground, so that might be a conversation we find some resolution on in this upcoming session. As well. I know Representative Wiley, you've been working on that for a good amount of time also. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts before we wrap up on that topic.
I think we need to have a whole meeting on that subject.
Yeah.
I'm frustrated and concerned, and I think that that's one of those areas where there needs to be different strategies. If this happens, we do this. If this happens, we need to really think through the implications of all the potential decisions. If California, starts, shipping product, how can your association help people build their business so that they can survive in different scenarios? And the fact that feds have acted or are going to act, but it may not be what everybody wants them to do. Having AFT regulate instead of, could have been another option. So there's there's a lot to unpack there, and I don't have any clear advice or a clear path, because and part of it frankly is because not everybody's speaking with one voice on the industry side, and those that there may be more people at the table, but they're recently at the table.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So integrating all of that and trying to come up with an approach needs some homework. We need to work together more closely on that and say, okay, this is what we're going to do this year, and this is how we're going to approach it. I'm willing to have that conversation and spend some time on it.
Great. As are we. As you know, I have had to testify. Lara's had to testify. I mean, that's how far back this goes. Every time the Cannabis Alliance has to say, our membership is split on this issue, but that also means we've been brokering this conversation for a good long time as well. And I think more so than ever, we're closer than we've ever been before on folks finding a way towards something that most everybody can get behind.
And now's not the time to stop talking.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. So we are wrapping up our final thoughts here. We're about to, like I said, launch into really full force campaign season here. I'm curious, what are on cannabis or not? What's on everybody's mind in this interim through the election cycle that you kind of are carrying around in your thought cycle? That was a really unclear question.
Yeah. Well, and there's a little bit of trickiness because I'm using their state computer, which is state resources and time. So there are some limits.
We need to do this
Yeah.
at a different time.
Yeah.
But I think I can just say safely that the things that we're hearing from constituents are about housing, housing affordability, rent stability. We're hearing questions about education. Education is really huge, and how we go about funding that appropriately down the road, and environmental issues. And I think those are some of the bigger ones. I just had, like I said, a town hall meeting yesterday, and those were some of the bigger ones that we were hearing about. So I think just like anything else, we're going to focus on those throughout our legislative work, as well as you'll see those in people's campaigns.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing the same things, what we do about some of the more controversial proposals on renter protection and help for people to keep housing are going to be back in full force. And how that conversation happens will partly depend upon who gets elected and who doesn't get elected. There will be some changes, and that can change the conversation, as we all know. But some of the things that the state is doing in terms of mental health and housing, I think it's going to be, I would predict that there's going to be a big focus on housing and services, education, of course, because there were some big holes in school budgets once the federal dollars ran out, and those are pretty desperate, and and everybody's being told that the big session is the one you deal with that in. So that's gonna take up a lot of the oxygen.
Yeah. I want to thank Representative Wiley, Representative Koba, for your time today, for your continued work. We only touched on 3 or 4 topics, and there are like 17 others. And I know that we will continue to talk because of your commitment to really understanding this industry, the complexities, and all of the ways that we touch other parts of our communities as well, and finding really salient pathways forward. Emma, I want to thank you for joining us, and I want to take a brief moment to honor the work that Senator Kaiser has done in her career, not just in cannabis, obviously, but just deeply impactful, and as a woman in leadership, just a real beacon for incredible work that she has done. And we are so honored that 1453 was a part of her legacy, and that we got that passed in her final session. So thank you for being here to represent her work. Just deeply grateful. With that, then I want to just say here at the Cannabis Alliance, we're dedicated to the advancement of a vital, ethical, equitable, and sustainable cannabis industry. I want to thank you all for your time today. It was a good one. Look forward to the next.
All
Yeah.
right. See you at the summit.
See you at the summit. Thank you, Representative.
Thank
Wow.
you.